All right, folks, good to see you all this morning. Thanks for the hike up the hill from around campus. We wanted to show Twyla, our lovely campus.
It's lovely.
And get her to walk a little bit and get us all to walk this morning. So that's sorry about that, but I think we've worked it out well. I want to particularly thank straight up Kate Barker and Mark Openlander in the Center for Applied Learning at our school. This is a center that engages with our students around wonderful, what we call high impact learning experiences. And this is one of those where we invite speakers from the community to address interesting topics and who come from interesting backgrounds and have interesting experiences to share with students outside or to complement our regular curriculum. So this is something that we do in our school, and we're delighted today to have two classes here. A constitutional law class from Dr. Caleb Henry's class, is that right? Mm-hmm. And then also a social justice capstone class with Dr. Kimberly Siegel. And we're delighted to have your class here, Kimberly, because I think it's the first time we've invited a class from outside of our school to participate in this series. So really appreciate you coming alongside us and participating in this series. All right, without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Twyla Carter to you this morning. Just to let you know, I'm Ross Stewart. I'm the Dean of the School of Business, Government and Economics, and so it's really a delight to run this series every quarter. But let me tell you a little bit about the amazing speaker we're going to hear from this morning. Twyla Carter has been the Senior Staff Attorney at the ACLU National Office in New York. She works on pretrial justice reform in the Criminal Law Project at the Trone Center for Justice and Equality. Mm-hmm. Prior to joining the ACLU, Twyla was a public defender for 10 years, and she held several positions in that space. From 2015 to 2017, she was a misdemeanor practice director for the King County Department of Public Defense and oversaw misdemeanor casework across the 4 divisions of the department. During the same time, she was part of the Juvenile Justice Equity Steering Committee. She was the member charged with recommending solutions to the growing racial disparity in the regional juvenile justice system. From 2014 to 15, Twyla was appointed as representative for the King County Department of Public Defense to the King County's Equal Opportunity and Affirmative Action Advisory Committee, becoming the first public defender to join that 21-member committee. From 2007 to 2015, Twyla was a public defender with the Defender Association. In that position, she handled a felony trial caseload in the Martin Luther King County Superior Court. Prior to her felony trial rotation, she represented juveniles charged with misdemeanor and felony crimes, adults charged with misdemeanor domestic violence crimes, and adults who appealed their misdemeanor convictions. Twyla has a published decision from the Court of Appeals Division 1, State versus Green, which addressed due process requirements for trespass orders issued by public school districts. Twyla received her Juris Doctorate from Seattle University School of Law, her BA in Criminal Justice, summa cum laude from Seattle University, and she has an AA from Seattle Central College. She received Seattle University School of Law's Black Law Student Association Alumni of the Year Award in 2014 and Young Lawyer of the Year Award from the Lauren Miller Bar Association in 2008. She is also a Leadership Institute Fellow and graduate. We're really honored to have you here today, Twyla, to speak to us. Please give our speaker, Twyla Carter, a warm welcome.
Wow, thank you. I appreciate being here. It's amazing what you can find on Google and LinkedIn. I was like, dang, okay. So good to be here with y'all. When you all hear me talking, if you have questions, we're going to engage in a discussion about the criminal legal system, not the criminal justice system. It is the criminal legal system, okay? So those of us who work in this business do not call it that anymore for good reason. 3 concepts that I applied in my life, which is why I went into public defense and work now as a civil rights lawyer. First one is that I believe we have criminalized mental health, we've criminalized addiction, and we've criminalized poverty. And we've used the criminal legal system as our only solution to all of societal ills. And that's why we have mass incarceration to the level that we do, highest in the world. The #1 state with the highest rate of incarceration right now is Louisiana, just taking over that title again in November from Oklahoma, which had that title for many years. Another concept that I try to live my life by and led to this path that I am on is that no human being should be defined by their worst decision, ever. And the third concept that I try to live my life by and led to this work is that we judge other people's decisions without knowing what those choices were. And I see that very clearly in all of the work that I do representing poor people in the legal system. As your dean articulated very well, I did start at community college, went to Seattle University School of Law, was a public defender for 10 years. That work is not for everyone. You don't get to pick your clients. You're representing poor people. And let me be very clear, all it takes to become the client of a public defender is to be poor and have someone make an accusation against you. That's it. So when you're driving down the street and you see people sitting on the side of the road and SPD or whomever law enforcement agency is standing around them and you drive by, how many people are thinking, wow, I wonder what they did? Is that what you think, right? Instinctively? Instead of thinking, well, there's an innocent person. I wonder what they've been accused of doing, right? And that's a culture problem that we have in this country. Because we're used to watching television shows that you get an accusation at the beginning and they've solved the crime by the end, including commercials, and everyone they accuse is exactly the suspect and everything they say is exactly right. That is not how it works in the real world at all. Again, all it takes to become my client is to be poor and have a bare allegation lodged against you. That is it. Then you are in the criminal legal system and you get to work your way out like everyone else, depending on your gender, your skin tone, your gender identity, et cetera, your level of cognitive ability, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to dictate, and of course your wealth is going to dictate the system that you go through and your experience as you go through it. I have been living in Brooklyn, New York for 2.5 years. I moved out to New York to work at the ACLU national office when our last president won. Not going to get into any political discussion about it, just going to say that I had a feeling things might happen with regards to civil rights and the issues that I care about. Interestingly enough, my colleagues are the folks that you all see on the news more around immigration, voting, LGBTQ, reproductive freedom rights, et cetera. Interestingly, the criminal legal system has bipartisan support right now, which is great, which is where you see the First Step Act and things like that that are getting passed through, right? So we're not taking it on the chin the same way that my colleagues are in an affirmative fashion. What we are dealing with, however, is the fact that this particular Senate has approved a record number of judges to lifetime appointments on the federal bench. If you're 30-something years old, that's a great accomplishment. I don't know of any job in this world where you cannot be qualified, get an unqualified rating, and still get a job for life, okay? And to think that the folks that are now, there are now over 200 people that have been appointed to positions, to think that that is not going to change the landscape of this country for generations to come would be a huge, huge mistaken assumption in the wrong direction. These folks are going to be on the bench for a very, very long time, and there's no automatic thing that they're going to rule one way or the other, but I'm just going to say it is very concerning when you're seeing folks testifying in front of Congress and being asked, do you know what a pretrial motion is? And they don't. Have you ever done a trial? And they haven't. Have you ever represented a poor client? And they haven't. And these folks have lifetime appointments on the federal bench. So what is very clear is that the local and state level is where all the action is at. It's all on y'all to do what you're going to do as our bright minds of the future, to stay actively engaged on the ground in your local community and make the changes that we, the people, can make, okay? A little bit about the cases that we work on at the Criminal Law Reform Project. So we mostly work on front-end issues in the criminal legal system: police officers, prosecutorial discretion, the right to have an attorney when you're accused of a crime, bail reform. Those are specific drivers that lead to mass incarceration. There are certainly other drivers on the back end, but those are the main drivers on the front end. So when you have interaction with a police officer, I'm going to encourage everyone that when you are talking to law enforcement, always ask, am I free to leave? Because by law, they have to let you know if you're free to leave. If they say yes, gather your items, zip your mouth, and walk away. If they say no, you're in a whole different ballgame. My suggestion, very strong suggestion, is that you then ask for a lawyer, because you are in an investigation at that point. You are not going to talk yourself out of it and get yourself a lawyer. Part of that culture change that I was talking about, when you're driving by and you see the person sitting on the side of the road, we also have this horrible precedent set that if you ask for a lawyer, it means you're guilty. No, it does not. It means you know your rights. And it means you understand how the criminal legal system actually works in this country, which is, unless you have a lot of money, you are already going to face the very first encounter, which is bail reform. So when a person is accused of a crime and they're arrested and taken to jail, you can have two people. The dean and I are both charged with a robbery. We did it together. We both go in front of the judge. The judge tells us that our bond amount is $50,000. Where do you think that bond amount even comes from? That $50,000. Where do you think that number comes from? What do you think? Just shout out an answer.
Is it random?
It's completely random. It is completely arbitrary. So you have this dollar amount that's now been put out there, and the dean can't afford to pay it, but I can. So then I pay it and I get out of jail. I need you to really think about this, because these are some of the changes that I need you all to make as you move forward with your career and in your lives as adults. You know the bail system is flawed. When a person who might actually be a danger to the community, for real, has the money to pay to get out of jail, but a poor person who throws a rock through the window cannot. You following me? That is our bail system. You will get a dollar amount placed on you that is completely arbitrary. And if you can pay it, you buy your freedom. If you can't, you sit in jail. 95% of all of the criminal cases that pass through the criminal legal system end in a guilty plea. To think that 95% of the time we're getting it right would be a huge mistake. People plead guilty to get out of jail. They have to go to school. They have to go to work. They have to pick up their kids. They have to go back to daycare. They have to go to treatment. They have another case that they have to go to court for. So they plead guilty to get out of jail, and then the collateral consequences from that conviction follow you around in this country for the rest of your life. Because whether or not you can ban the box and not mark that you've been convicted, if people want to run a criminal background check on you, they can. If they want to discriminate against you, they absolutely can, and they do. So it's a vicious cycle of a system that's really based on wealth that creates two tiers of justice in this country. We know, according to the Vera Institute's great work that they've done over the years, we know that on any given day in this country, 465,000 people are sitting in jail because they couldn't pay bond and they're facing a non-violent allegation. Almost 500,000 people every day just because they couldn't afford to get out of jail. And every single person in this room is paying taxes to then house, clothe, give them medication, feed them, etc. Not to mention the lasting impact on the community by them not getting out there working, raising their kids, and doing all their own things and being productive members of society. So the collateral consequences of all of these things impact all of us. It's not something that we can continue to sit on the sidelines and say, oh wow, this is really bad. We are the #1 incarcerator in the country. And if you have never been to jail or know anyone who's been to jail or visited them in jail, there is absolutely nothing glamorous about sitting in a cage as a human being. I don't care for how long it is. So when we pull numbers out of the sky and say 6 months, 60 years, whatever that we just throw at people, you spend a day in a cage, away from your friends and family, being told when you can use the restroom, when you can shower, what you can wear, what time bedtime is, what time you eat breakfast. It is very real, and the consequences are devastating to individuals, to families, to communities, to society as a whole. And we have to reverse this trend, or literally we are incarcerating every single person. And then when they get out again, like I said, that conviction then follows them around and keeps them from getting another apartment, another job, et cetera, et cetera. And they've missed time with their children and all of the consequences that flow from that. Some of the cases that I work on, because I primarily do, even though I've listed out police, prosecutors, bail reform, right to counsel, those particular drivers into mass incarceration. I work on bail reform and right to counsel. I'm trying not to touch my face, y'all, so if I do, be like, don't do that! Okay. So bail reform, which we just talked about, and then the ability to have a lawyer the very first time you're in front of a judge. So for those of you who may have access to resources, you know that if you get in trouble, you're going to call your parents are going to call a lawyer. Imagine telling that lawyer, don't come to the very first hearing that I'm in front of the judge. I'll handle that myself. No one's going to do that, right? If you can afford a lawyer, your lawyer's with you every single time you're in front of a judge. If you're poor, even though you have a Sixth Amendment right to effective assistance of counsel, if you're poor and you go in front of the judge for the first time to have that bail hearing that we just talked about, a lot of jurisdictions in this country don't have lawyers there. So the person is stuck trying to figure out, what am I allowed to say that doesn't have anything to do with the allegation, so I don't incriminate myself, but also tell you on why I need to get out of jail and I can't afford to be here, right? And navigate the legal system on their own. As you can imagine, folks are not successful when they do that. So they start out from the first day in jail with that dollar amount that we talked about. And then again, if you're not able to pay the dollar amount, you sit in jail and you plead guilty to get out. And that's how most people resolve their criminal cases. And again, the consequences are unbelievably severe when we do that. So the cases that I have right now, I have one in Galveston, Texas, where it's the first case in the country where the federal court has ruled at the preliminary injunction stage, which is the stage that we say, what's happening in this court, in this jurisdiction is so bad that you have to step in right now, urgently, and stop it. It's the first case in the country that we have where a federal judge has said that people do have a right to have a lawyer at that bail hearing. And it's the first case where I watched an elected prosecutor for the first time in this country testify under oath at a hearing about how they come up with those numbers. And they're just as arbitrary as you would expect. Because how do you know $50,000 is going to get me to come but not get him to come, right? How do you know $1,500 is not going to get me to come but could get him to come? A system that's based on wealth at all has absolutely nothing to do with justice. And our system is absolutely based on wealth. Texas is that case. It's going right now. We're in front of the Fifth Circuit because the defendants have appealed our ruling on certifying our class. We bring class action lawsuits, so on behalf of huge swaths of people versus what I did as a public defender, which was represent one client at a time, right? I also have a case in South Carolina that just resolved. That was a right to counsel case, which was the right to have a lawyer at all of those hearings, which we've now settled, and so those folks do have lawyers there. We have a state case in Pennsylvania that also litigates the same issues. Y'all need to understand, there are jurisdictions in this country where imagine you steal something from the store, you go into the courthouse, into the courtroom, and the arresting officer is your prosecutor. The judge sitting on the bench is not a lawyer. The person's a former cop who took some classes, and that's the judge. And then you yourself as the defendant have no lawyer. So there's not a lawyer in the room, and everyone's going to jail behind criminal charges. And that is legal in certain jurisdictions. It's wrong, and it's unbelievably horrible as a system, but they have authority to do that in places like Pennsylvania, South Carolina, and other states. I do a lot of work now in the Deep South. So I have cases in North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, Oklahoma. We filed the first case last December in the country where we are litigating ADA and Rehab Act claims in the bail context. So where we are litigating when we know that 50% of the people in jail suffer from some form of disability. We are now litigating release and right to counsel around those claims that under the ADA and the Rehabilitation Act you have accommodations rights and things like that the court and the jail must be able to accommodate. Otherwise, it's another way that you can get out of jail. The legal issues that we have at stake in these cases is, as you can imagine, if we're talking about the difference between wealth and poor, then equal protection, right? Substantive due process, because you have a fundamental right to your liberty, and in order for the government to take that away from you, we argue that you have to meet the heightened standard of review to show that it's a narrowly tailored reason why the government would say that you should not be free because you're either going to be a danger to the community or there's a significant risk that you're not going to return to court. There's none of that discussion being done in any courtroom in a lot of courtrooms around this country, even in Martin Luther King County Jr. or Junior County, where we do it better than we do in other places. You walk into court and watch a bail hearing, and those hearings are 30 seconds. People are not allowed to talk. There's no lawyer there. The judge just tells them the dollar amount, tells them the next court date, and that's it. And that person literally is hearing the dollar amount and is like, I can either pay that or I can't. And then it dictates what happens the rest of your case. It's not just a matter of not being released. If you're not out of jail, you're not able to assist me as your public defender with going to get that alibi evidence that you told me about, going and identifying those witnesses that you told me about, going to get all of the things from your house that support that you were somewhere else or that, you know, this is what actually happened, right? So being locked up also has those consequences as well, because you're not able to actually assist in defending yourself in the way that you would if you were released. I have a case in Detroit, Michigan against the 36th District Court, which is, Detroit's a primarily black area, and so all of our plaintiffs in that case are black. Damn near all the judges are black in that case as well. And we litigate people who are charged with failing to show up to court. So when you hear about people who get warrants, and you might think, well, if they're not coming to court, they should be in jail maybe. But what we find is that a lot of people who miss court, it's not a willful violation, which is what the law requires, that it has to be willful. You have to have deliberately missed court, not because you were laying in a hospital and missed a court, right? And think of how many people just forget doctor's appointments and dentist appointments. And then if you're homeless, you don't have the advantage of having a phone and your calendar with you and all of those things, plus you're struggling to deal with life, right? So all of these drivers that lead people to get in jail and then remain in there until they plead guilty to get out. And then have a case in North Carolina as well, where we're at settlement also along the same exact issues we talked about. So we talked about equal protection, we talked about substantive due process, there's also procedural due process. So what the hearing is supposed to look like when you're in court is me as the judge, I'm supposed to say to you, do you understand what I'm saying? Do you read and write in English? How long have you lived in the area? What are your ties to the community, right? How long have you been working? Where do you work at? How much do you make? Regardless of how much you make, how much are you spending? How much is your rent, et cetera, et cetera? Because my presumption should be to release you without conditions. That's the rule. That's the rule in the state of Washington, and that's the rule in a lot of states, is the presumption is release without conditions. But what we find is what happens to human nature. Judges don't want to release people and then have that one person go out and do something bad, and then their name ends up in a headline, right? I can understand that on a human level, but what we've done then, out of self-preservation, is we're locking everybody up. That's how far the pendulum has swung. We just lock everybody up for fear that the one person who gets out. And it's the same thing that you all see on the news. So when you hear about the person who is either a non-legal citizen, who raped a woman, or somebody who got out on bond, who raped a woman, horrible case. But don't you dare forget, there are thousands of people who get released every day who don't do anything but go to work and go to school and go home. We don't hear about those cases because there's nothing to hear. So you're always going to hear the parade of the horribles from people who want to tell you that the sky is falling. Do not fall for it. The way we are incarcerating people, there are way more people getting out every day who just go to work and get on with their lives and are actually committing violent crimes. And I make that distinction because even if we are going to cut mass incarceration, I'm not talking about just cutting the shopliftings and the trespasses and the non-violent crimes. We have to start dealing with the violent crimes too. We have to start dealing with the robberies. And I will tell you that in my practice as a juvenile defender, what was most frustrating was watching young kids of color primarily who would get charged with robbery when actually what they did was steal an iPhone from another kid, okay? So if she's holding her phone in her hand and I take it from her, that's technically a robbery because I've taken it by some level of force, and you don't need to have injury for there to be a robbery. That is a Class B felony. That's serious. We're already into serious territory when you get charged with a robbery. But now what is interesting is if a white kid did the exact same thing, what we find is that the prosecutor charges the white kid with a theft in the 3rd degree and an assault in the 4th degree, which is what they could do in every case, but they don't. So then you get the discretion and you get what we have as the race disproportionality that we see. Systemic racism does not mean that everyone in the system is racist. It's not what it means. Systemic racism means that we have programs and institutions and systems that result in racially disparate outcomes, regardless of the intentions of the people who work within those systems. And in a place like liberal progressive Seattle, that's where we run into problems, because everyone here swears that we're super duper woke. And yet our race disproportionality is actually bigger here than it is in the South, because the number of black and brown people in our jails and in our criminal legal system here far surpasses the numbers in general population, right? So when you look at the race disproportionality here as compared to Mississippi, it is much bigger here. And if you think that the eastern half of the state is who is screwing us up, you'd be wrong about that. And again, I will reiterate again, the place where the most liberal, self-proclaimed liberal and progressive people are is where you're likely going to find the biggest race disproportionality issues. Because when you are too super woke to realize that you also have been raised in this country to at least adopt racist views and have racist views, the more we deny that and don't act like it's real because we weren't raised that way, or I don't think this way, or I don't feel this way, and we ignore what our implicit biases do to our thinking and do to our actions, then we have the outcomes we have. And everyone sits around going, how can this be, right? How do we have mass incarceration? We're all such great people, right? So that's something that we all have to check for ourselves. And it doesn't matter if you're white or black. Everybody in this country, if you were raised in this country watching TV, cartoons, everything else, all of the other subliminal messaging that comes through, you have been raised to have views about the other. And if we don't check that, then we get the situation that we have. In all of our cases, so procedural due process, like I said, so what that looks like is the court is supposed to actually say, where do you work, how much do you make, how long have you lived here, how much could you afford? I see that you have some violent criminal history from 5 years ago. I'm a little concerned about that. I see that you haven't come to court in the past. I'm a little concerned about that. But before I slap a dollar amount on you, it has to be a dollar amount that you can actually afford. Bail was never intended to keep people in jail. Bail was always meant for you to be able to get out of jail. And it's reversed now, where it just keeps poor people in. Not to mention the fact that most poor people are who we police, et cetera, right? That's who we over-police, our poor communities. The remedies that we seek in our cases are damages. Sometimes we seek just straight up money for our plaintiffs, our clients. But mostly we seek declaratory relief, which is where the court will declare that something's been unconstitutional. Or we seek injunctive relief, where the court declares that something's unconstitutional and says that you're enjoined from doing it, which means you can no longer have those practices and policies. You have to change them. So those are the main remedies that we have, and we usually accomplish resolution for our cases through litigation, which is just straight up dropping lawsuits on people. Through advocacy, where we can work with our legislature to change laws, or we work with schools or police officers, et cetera, and just try to advocate for change and work with folks across the aisle or across different spectrums, so we can work with everyone to make the systemic change that we want. We do it through negotiations, which is always interesting, because when I'm engaging in negotiations, I'm usually sitting across from the government, and they don't necessarily feel the way that I do about these issues, right? So when you're talking to folks who don't agree with you, or who don't believe you, or who don't trust you, or they believe to a point, but they're not willing to go as far as we want them to, type of a thing, how do we handle those discussions? And we can talk about that too, on what negotiations looks like, which I think is important, because nowadays when everything is so divisive, I think it's really, really important that we find common ground and ways to work together with people who don't agree with us on everything, and nor do they have to. And we don't have to convince people to change their minds, but we do need to understand and respect where folks are coming from. And I have found that from talking to people one-on-one with people who don't look anything like me, whose backgrounds are completely different than mine, they want a healthy, safe environment for their kids to live too, right? So if that's our starting point, then we can find some low-hanging fruit and some things that we can work together on to make some changes, even if it's around the edges, and then we can start to bite off bigger chunks as we move along. And then, of course, we move into settlement. And then the big piece, which is enforcement, which is making sure that once we've come into your jurisdiction and we've sued you or we've changed the law there, that it in fact stays that way and it doesn't just roll back to the way it was before. And all of that can only happen if we have really strong, meaningful partnerships with community organizations and community members. I am a child of Thurgood Marshall. I believe in using my law degree in conjunction with community, because it doesn't matter how smart I think I am walking into someone else's neighborhood, into someone else's community, talking about their issues, and how dare I think I know the solutions more than they do. What really happens is that folks on the ground have been working on their issues for decades and generations. They just don't have the technical support or the money, et cetera, that the ACLU might have, right? So it's important for us to stay grounded and to work with community and not act like we know something better when we don't come from that area. Does all that make sense so far? What do y'all think about this so far, about what you're hearing? What thoughts are you having? What questions might you have so far? Yeah.
How far does the ACLU reach to help people? Do you guys do it totally across the country, or?
Good question. He's saying, how far is our reach to help people? Are we across the country? Yes, we are. We have 54 affiliates. We have at least one affiliate in every single state. We don't do anything in a state without our affiliate, because they're closer to the ground than we are. Our cases can percolate up to us at national through our affiliate, or we can get calls straight from people in jail or what have you and say, this is what's going on. And then we go and do, which is the most fun part of my job, which is to fly into a jurisdiction wearing my Brooklyn hoodie and my jeans and just go into court and just sit in the back row and watch and see what's happening on the ground in various jurisdictions, and just do the investigative part and talk to people and figure out what's going on. And then we figure out our next steps from there. On which route are we going to go? We don't start with a lawsuit. That's the heaviest hammer we have. We'd like to work with people, but we're also not trying to work with people who are going to do the bare minimum just to get rid of us, right? We're actually trying to make systemic change when we go into a jurisdiction to do something. That's a good question. I appreciate that. Yes, I'm going to work my way across. I see your hand and then your hand. Go ahead.
As the criminal legal system is supposed to hold accountability.
Yeah.
How would you define accountability, and how would you see the criminal legal system providing that accountability for both parties?
That's a great question. The criminal legal system, thank you for using that, is supposed to provide accountability. How would I define accountability, and how does the criminal legal system provide accountability for both parties? And by both parties, I'm going to go with the victim and the person who's been accused. It's a great question, and that's the million-dollar question, right? You know, accountability is important. Everyone must be accountable for their actions and their decisions. Absolutely true. What that looks like, though, has to be measured, has to make sense, can't be over the top, needs to be appropriate for whatever the particular accused conduct is, right? I think for full disclosure, it's only fair that I at least explain a little bit of who I am. I'm a public defender and only went to law school to be a public defender because I am far more offended, way, way, way more offended by the police running up into your house without a warrant than I am by the dead body they find in the garage. In other words, government intrusion and government checks and balances is my passion. That's what I care the most about. So while I can talk about individuals and accountability and should we have restorative justice methods in the Native American culture where you actually sit with the victim and, you know, actually work it out yourselves, I think we should be doing more of that. We have lots of people who are being accused of low-level nonviolent crimes that shouldn't even be in the criminal legal system at all. They could do diversion programs, or they do community service hours, or pay the money back, or paint the garage, or whatever, right? Back in the day, for those of us who are older, back the way that neighbors used to look out for each other and you used to just handle things on your block, we should be doing some more stuff that way. If we are going to have individuals who we've decided as a society need to sit down for a while, then we at least need to be thoughtful about what that means. What are those conditions of the jail like? Because if you start looking around this country, especially if you go to Mississippi, to Parchman and different places like that, it is unreal. And you would think you were looking at a facility in a different country, and you're not. So just because someone has done something wrong doesn't mean that they get treated any less than the dignified human being that they are. So whether we're going to decide that people have to sit down for a little while or not because they've done something that we all deem is dangerous and they do scare us, et cetera, I believe that we should have to prove that. I'm particularly worried, look, I'm a woman, totally get it, but I'm also an auntie, a daughter, et cetera. So when I think of the Me Too movement, for example, totally get that we're going to believe what women or anyone says. But I also worry that by the end of the day, you've lost your job, your entire career, like it's astonishing how quickly we will judge somebody and blow their whole world up without ever stepping foot in a courtroom at all. If someone just makes an accusation and it shows up on the news, you're done. God forbid you have a tweet from when you were 12 years old and you're in your 60s and that resurfaces, right? And then how we, again, what is that measured response that we're supposed to have to hold people accountable? Regardless of whatever we do to hold people accountable, it should not be based on wealth. There should be no cash component whatsoever involved in our criminal legal system, not at the front end or at the back end for fines and fees. Everything is through money. And when you go into these jurisdictions that I'm talking about, where you've got small courts where there's no lawyer in the room, you're walking into big, beautiful courtrooms with sea foam chairs and all of the technology you can imagine. And you better believe that's being paid for by all these fines and fees and bail money that they're getting off the backs of poor people. So, you know, that's a discussion that we certainly can have as a larger group on what accountability looks like based on an accusation. The reason I hesitate to answer it with just one blanket answer is because as a public defender, I know, like I said, someone can be charged with robbery, but someone else got an assault and a theft. Like, our whole system from start to finish isn't fair. So accountability for what? And accountability for who? And are we holding individuals to a higher accountability than our elected and appointed officials? Because we are. In this country, 95% of prosecutors are straight white men and they run unopposed every single election. So while we can all sit here and talk about mass incarceration, when was the last time you looked at all into who was running for your prosecutor? I'm willing to bet you haven't. I'm willing to bet you don't even think about that. Judges run unopposed all the time. Your sheriff, your police chief, how many of you actually watch those races? You don't. And yet the biggest time suck and money suck in this country is our criminal legal system. And nobody's paying attention to it the way that we should. So I'm not at all advocating for no accountability for people, but what I am saying is the entire system needs to be blown up, actually, and start over if we're actually going to do this fairly and do it right. But people should be held accountable. It's just, what does that look like for both parties? And I think that there are a lot of victims in cases as well who didn't intend for that person to go to prison for 15 years, right? Or they're like, yeah, I was harmed and I feel really bad, but I've learned more about this person and I'd like this person to get help, or I'd like this person to go to school and get some training, and et cetera. The criminal legal system does not work that way. And I think a lot of people call the police because that's what they're wanting, is that help. This isn't the 1940s and the 1950s where the cops would show up and sit at your kitchen table with you, drink some coffee, and talk through the problem. Someone's getting arrested, someone's going to jail, and then it's the system that I just laid out for you, right? So even when you think in terms of domestic violence and no contact orders, we get a lot of young people who get in trouble behind consensual no contact orders because only the defendant is the person who's supposed to stay away. I personally believe if it went both ways, that would cut down on the problem. Because there's a whole bunch of people that are like, no, come over one day, and then now I'm mad at you, now I'm calling the police. So then you have this revolving door of people going in and out of jail just because of that, right? So again, when we think of victims and defendants, just even how the system is set up to curb just even those sorts of, that sort of manipulation or abuse that you can see as well from a different angle. But it's a really good question and something that we should continue to talk about, certainly more with your generation. You had a question as well?
Yeah, this is more a question about like the ACLU in general.
Mm-hmm.
Is it just like positions there? Is it just like legal, like not, I guess just lawyers, or is there like other types of like people in positions that work with different types of things, like in terms of policy research, and like what like positions does like the ACLU consist of?
That's a great question. What positions are at the ACLU? Absolutely. You don't have to just be a lawyer there. There's advocacy positions, there's communications positions, there's policy positions, there's development if you're good at raising money or, reaching out to donors. There's doing all of our communication stuff, whether it's digital, in print, doing TV interviews, or doing the, managing the Twitter account. There's we have a Summer Advocacy Institute for college students, high school students. We have community organizers. The community organizing piece is very new for us because we have always been a litigation shop. We've been around for 100 years. We are the premier civil rights organization in this country. To your question, we cover the entire waterfront of every single issue, which means that we have internal fights pretty much every day Because when we represent Charlottesville, right, when we represent the Nazis in Charlottesville, best believe people like me were like, hold up, okay? But I'm also a lawyer, so I get that while the First Amendment is very important and freedom of speech is very important, and I understand that that is a concept that must be applied across the board, even if that means that you may have to represent an undesirable, to me, group of folks to preserve that law. You can get into some personal doctrinal conflicts, right? But that's the beauty of working at the ACLU too, is because you're challenged in that way, because we don't turn our back on anybody. We represent everyone for all of the civil rights. And it certainly is more than anything than just the legal departments. If you go to the ACLU website and just look like ACLU jobs, it'll pull up all the different categories of types of jobs that are available. But that's a great question, because you do not need to be a lawyer to work at the ACLU. And I proudly put that I went to Seattle Central, Seattle University, and Seattle University School of Law, because everybody there is from Harvard, Yale, et cetera, et cetera. So I proudly put that on my bio, because I want everyone from here to also see you can make it, you can do stuff on the national level there as well. Yes?
I was just wondering, like, do you ever get burnt out or, like, exhausted by the work that you do?
That's a good question. Do you ever get burnout or exhausted? No, I don't. I think, you know, failure and giving up is not an option. We are in the middle of our civil rights war, folks. I know it doesn't look the same way as it did in the 60s, and it's a little disheartening to know that all of our outrage and protests come by way of social media. People say whatever they're going to say on social media. We organize our protests on a Saturday when everyone can get time off work. You have enough time to make your fancy sign, but then you're right back to work on Monday. In any other country, we would be storming this place until we got the change that we wanted. So for me, burnout is not, I'm nowhere near burnout. Even as a public defender, I wasn't, because the cause and the issues are so important and so great. And it's kind of the, if not me, then who, if not now, then when type of thing, right? Because we are absolutely in the middle of our civil rights movement of your generation. And if it doesn't feel like that to you, then you're not paying close enough attention, because we are. Your rights are getting stripped every day. Yes?
It's kind of two questions, I guess. The first part is, does the ACLU ever do, like, civil law cases, or is it solely criminal? And then the other part is, are there ever cases where you know you will not get a fair trial if it's held in that jurisdiction, and can it get moved to a different jurisdiction?
Great question. So do we do civil and not criminal? Great question. I'll start with that. We actually don't do, so even though I do criminal law reform project, it's actually civil-based practice. Okay, so that's a great question and great distinction to make. In public defense, you are representing one client at a time, you're doing straight up criminal law, and you're using state law, right? At the ACLU, you're doing civil impact litigation, which are class action lawsuits at the federal level. So even though the underlying pin might be the criminal case, you're in civil, it's civil practice, and it's federal civil court. To your point on, are we ever going, do we have cases where we know we're going to lose? Absolutely. And given the makeup of the federal bench that I just described, absolutely. We just got a horrific ruling out of the Ninth Circuit earlier this week on an immigration issue, and it's devastating, because the Ninth Circuit used to be, you know, that was the court that at least you knew that you might get a liberal leaning view on. And so with the makeup of the federal judges that are coming in, there is no federal circuit that you can say like is just this way. In fact, you can say it the opposite way. There are federal circuits that are conservative now that you know you're going to have a hard time in, but we don't have a choice because we still have to bring our cases. And then obviously the US Supreme Court has changed as well. So again, these are lifelong, life-lasting consequences that are happening. While all the other stuff is going on television, meanwhile, they are nominating and confirming folks left and right and appointing them to these benches. My case in Oklahoma, which was filed in December, and I have more time if y'all do. My case in Oklahoma, the original federal judge that we had was rumored to be an 80-year-old Reagan appointee, known racist, which I was like, great, because the first top 4 lawyers are black lawyers, so it was like, this will be fun. It's the 10th Circuit, so the 10th Circuit hasn't been tested yet in this way around bail reform. New federal judge was appointed, Judge Dishman. She's in her mid-30s, She's a Trump appointee. She at least comes with no red flags from all of the social justice organizations that have flagged other folks. She had a unanimous vote to become a federal judge, so it makes us feel good. She's in her mid-30s, so I feel like she might actually get bail reform. She might actually get the idea that people should be in front of a judge with a lawyer because she's younger. So it's hard to say, and I definitely don't make any blanket assumptions or expectations based on someone's political affiliation. I really don't, because I hope that people are going to follow the law and do the right thing regardless. So we'll see how it plays out. And we've received some interesting rulings. The Fifth Circuit right now, where my case is in Texas, where we won the ruling, I said, where you can have a lawyer at that very first hearing. The Harris County case was the first big bail case in the country that actually got a federal ruling, and it's out of the Fifth Circuit. And you know, the Fifth Circuit's Texas. It's a pretty conservative court, and yet they are giving us really good rulings on criminal legal system issues. So it's hard to say, but you don't get to forum shop. You don't get to pick where you think you're going to get. You know, it does come into the strategic play, right? If I know I'm going to be in the Ninth Circuit, which covers California, Oregon, Washington, right, all the way down, I may go to Oregon if I think the facts are better there than they are in Washington. So I may, you know, look for cases where the facts are going to be the best to present to that court, but I don't get to go to a different circuit if, you know, if I don't like what I don't like. Kind of stuck with what I have, which is why the local level is where everything is at. Yep, question?
So when I think of mass incarceration, I think of kind of like the hegemony of the privatized jail monopoly owned by like straight white men.
Yep.
So has that system been like slowing down at all, or has that been growing, or like
Private prisons?
yeah?
Private prisons is ballooning in a large part, not just because of mass incarceration, which you absolutely have. It's the old adage, you build it, they're going to fill it. That's a fact. So even the juvenile justice system, you know, the center here, where everyone's like, no, our numbers are down. I don't know what you needed a whole new building for, because I promise you they're going to shove kids through there to get all the services. If that's where the services are provided, they're going to find ways to funnel kids through there. That's why it's there. So to your point, the private prison business has exploded, not just because of mass incarceration, because of overcrowding in all of the government facilities, but also because of the government facilities are not maintained. They're not safe. They're not sanitary. So then you have all these private prisons that look beautiful and whatever, right? And so, yeah.
And so considering like, I don't know, that kind of like system, are there connections with judges then with these like privatized jails that are in place?
That's a great question. So we look for things like that. Obviously that's a problem. That's a judicial issue, you know, the appearance of fairness, et cetera. We have seen judges that will funnel cases to third-party treatment providers, for example, or other benefits that they might get, like they know the guy who owns the, you know, ankle bracelet business, for example, right? Or they know the bail bondsman. So you do see those connections, and we look for those and obviously react accordingly, because you can't do that. Not necessarily the direct link with prisons, but that is certainly something that we look for. We see things all the time between the sheriff is funneling things, you know, or what have you, because it does obviously a good breeding ground for any level of corruption, and so we certainly look for that as part of our cases as well. Good question. Yes.
So my understanding is that one of the most racially disproportionate issues is petty drug possession charges.
Yep.
And in light of the legalization of specifically cannabis in a number of states, is the ACLU doing anything to attempt to commute previously existing sentences for cannabis possession?
Great question. We are literally in the process of doing our marijuana report, the follow-up to that we released years ago. It should be coming out any day now. In fact, my boss is working on finalizing it as we speak. You know, that's an excellent point, especially here in Washington or in Colorado and other states where it's legal. But, you know, let that sink in for a minute. If you go to 23rd and Union, I remember, this cell is my home. This is home for me. So I remember watching, you know, guys back in the day who would slang, as we call it, sell weed on the corner and go to prison behind that. Now you've got white-owned dispensaries making millions on the exact same corner where black and brown people went to prison behind. And not only that, but the white dispensary owners, none of that money is going back into those communities. Nobody's saying, like, you know, if you're going to do all of that, then put a portion of it and put it back and like create jobs or, you know, do something with that back into the exact community. You're still feeding it to the same people. It's expanded more. You're on the exact same block. Everyone else did the exact same thing and went to prison behind. Then you contrast that with Mississippi or in the South, where here you can possess marijuana if you're 21 and over. You do that in the South, small amount of marijuana, you're going to prison. I mean, it's crazy the amount of disparity that you see, not just on drug charges, not just on who gets it, but just from jurisdiction to jurisdiction as well. But yes, there is a movement to try to, there's a lot of places, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Florida, they've expunged a lot of the marijuana records, which is great. That's the movement that we want to see because, again, those collateral consequences, it affects your federal financial aid if you've got a weed conviction on your record, right? So even if you're coming from a legal state, but you go to school somewhere else, it's a problem. So yes, there is movement to work on that and try to correct those disparities the same way that we saw between the crack and cocaine disparity as well. Any other questions, thoughts about anything? Yep.
Do you think there's a period of the U.S. legal system that you would consider just, that could set a goal for us now, or do you think you have to just look elsewhere to blow up the whole system?
That's a great question. Is there a part of the criminal legal system or U.S. system at all that is just? We're on a college campus. I'm going to keep it as real with y'all as I can. Every single institution in this country is based on white supremacy and racism. So when I know that that is the foundation, my thought process is no. And one of the things to support that, when you think of risk assessment tools have been used pre-trial to help judges determine whether or not this person is scary and should we let them out. So they created this tool that's supposed to be neutral, so it's not the judge subjectively saying this person is dangerous and the prosecutor and the defense attorney aren't just saying what they're saying, but this tool is supposed to test you on things. And the main organization is the Arnold Foundation. The MacArthur Foundation is the main organization that has pushed this out all over the country. And an organization called Pretrial Justice Institute. Literally a week ago, Pretrial Justice Institute released a statement completely reversing their position on pretrial risk assessment tools because of the racism that's baked in. Because you cannot account for why the police officer stopped me and not your dean, right? There's no way to account for that in a tool. That's just prejudice. There's no way to account for that in our system. So when we know that kids get funneled through the foster care system, kids at school, in elementary school, a black child is going to get treated differently than a white child. I've never heard of a white child at the age of 6 getting arrested like I did the little black girl recently, right? So when you know that that has a part in everything, it's hard to say that something then is fair. If you've got racially inflected variables going in, you're going to get racially inflected results. I don't know how you separate it out. Until we deal with our racism, our racist history, and have truth and reconciliation like they did in South Africa, I don't think we're going to be able to move on. Yep.
That note, do you do cases with the foster system or with like family court and such?
We can. So she's asking if we do cases with the foster care system or with family court. We can. Our affiliates for sure more so because they're on the ground in those individual states. So yes, but it depends on, again, is there a class action level issue? Is it big enough? Does it hit a constitutional, law issue? How big is it? It doesn't have to be huge for us necessarily to take it, but there has to be some, some hooks in there that we need. But yes, there's no system that we don't work with or touch on or do something with in some capacity or another, whether it's on the local level in a particular state or whether we do it through national. There's no system that we would not touch. If the government is involved, or even private businesses, depending on what it is, but if the government is involved at all, we're watching. That's the point. So it's funny because when we go into town, and I am in my Brooklyn hoodie and in my jeans or whatever, and you always have to come up with what your story is going to be, because I'm not going to lie if you blatantly ask me what I'm doing, but I will try to come up with something other, because we don't do social visits. If we're in your town watching, you're doing something wrong. We're not there for a social call. Any other questions, thoughts, or anything? I want to say to all of you as we're wrapping up, you are the future, you are the present. Don't have these conversations, listen to this stuff, and not take it and do something with it, whether it's pushing back on your friends and family, whether if you are lucky enough to come from a place of privilege and have some level of resources and your parents own businesses or they can hire people, talk to them about hiring formerly incarcerated people. Talk to them about these issues. Stay engaged at the local level with who's running for prosecutor, who's running for judge, who's your police chief. We cannot keep sitting around talking about mass incarceration, locking everyone up, but we're actually not doing anything to effectuate change. Start showing up to town halls and grilling all of these officials that are running for office. Grill them about these issues and be really loud and vocal if they're giving you answers that you don't appreciate or that you don't like. If they do give you answers that you appreciate and you like and you elect them and they get into office, then hold them accountable. But whatever you do, use your vote to pay attention to what's happening on the local level. We are locking people up at an alarming rate, folks. In the civil rights movement, like I said, it is now. So whatever you're reading in your books, just lift your head. You are in the middle of it. This is your generation's movement. Okay? Thank you for your time, y'all.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us.
Absolutely.
Very small gift for you
Oh,
as
bless.
an expression of thank you. If you do have a few minutes and would like to stay around to talk further, please feel free to do that. We will be here for a few moments, but
Yeah.
just let's give one more round of just deep appreciation.
Oh,
for
bless.
being
Thank
here.
you. Appreciate it. Really good questions.
All right, you are dismissed.
Yeah, thanks for coming, y'all.